everyone. Happy Friday, day 19. Get in there. So today what we're going to work on, as well as tomorrow, is expanding upon the external retention, or Kumbhaka. So complementary to what we've been doing with the internal retention, or antar Kumbhaka. And so it's going to be very similar, except for the fact that the external retention tends to be a lot more intense than the internal retention. You've either, specifically in regards to how we're going to work with it today, you've exhaled all your oxygen away, plus some CO2, but you're essentially left with nothing, and then you're attempting to hold your breath for as long as you can, starting at nothing. So the fire, the panic, the anxiety, the sense of contraction and tightening and suffocation at large is a lot more pronounced. So heads up for that. But before we get into the physical details that you can do to really make that as not necessarily as enjoyable, but to ensure that you work with it to the best of your ability. Before that, again, why, right? Rationalizing this, and why rationalizing. And so there's a couple things I wanted to talk about. There's this strange and really powerful technique that yogis work on that sort of puts context to the entire practice and elevates the profundity of yoga, especially once you know about it. And so the technique is Maha, which means great, and Samadhi, which is sort of like union with the divine. And so Mahasamadhi is when an adept, right? So someone who's really skillful with these philosophies and these techniques, and has really opened their heart to the ideas of divinity, the ideas of something beyond death. And so this adept, in the moment of their death, will perk up, assume their meditative posture, more than likely breathe normally, and become very, very sensitive to the conversation of their body as it signals the end to the brain, and vice versa. And upon that final moment, there will be a final breath, and that breath will be an exhale. It will be a rechaka. And then after that final breath, there will be a spontaneous Kumbhaka. There will be an inescapable, self-occurring external retention. And so the breath will vacate the body, and the adept at this point will do what they have been doing for more than likely decades and assume their practice. And they'll, I guess they're not holding their breath at that point, their breath is left, but they will assume the mentality and assume the focus and attempt to assume the posture and attempt to assume the bandhas. And because you all have a little bit of experience with it now in your muscle memory, I think it might actually, trigger some physical response. But there's always a point when we are holding our breath, especially on the exhale, that we are forced to inhale. And that point is untraversable because we are alive and our body's forcing us to continue our life. But during Mahasamadhi, you will blip into that other side, you'll die, and hopefully retain some vestige of consciousness, hopefully retain some vestige of form as you descend or ascend into that, proverbial void. So it's super, super enticing. I always oddly think of Peter Pan in one of the remakes where Hook is standing above him and Pan is sitting there, and Hook's threatening him with death, and Peter Pan grins, oh death, the last great adventure. So this is really sort of the ethos that the yogis have, and understanding this final technique, this sort of graduation, really puts context to the entire practice and adds depth to it. This is about death. This is about overcoming death in a very, very literal way, or at least preparing ourselves for that moment in the hope and in the faith that something does continue. Despite the fact that everything changes and everything is impermanent, the yogi holds on to this assumption. Something must last, because there is duality to a degree. If everything does dissolve, if everything does change, something must be eternal. So super cool. That's called Mahasamadhi. And as you practice this, if that strikes you and interests you, it's going to come to you one day if you attempt to die well and die consciously. So heavy duty stuff, but powerful stuff. And that's all we'll talk about in terms of philosophy today. In terms of really getting the most out of this technique or this exploration. When you've exhaled, you're going to exhale through your mouth, just like yesterday, to be sure you've pushed all the air out of your lungs. There's this last sort of final gale that comes out of your mouth. Then you're going to be holding your breath. Perk up your posture, but attempt to stay as relaxed as you can. So if you're tight, if your jaw is tense, if your shoulders are tense, if you're making fists, if there's any form of tension in the body, that's going to create more carbonic acid. And so you're going to become more acidic more quickly, which is going to make it more uncomfortable for you. And so you're relaxed, you're letting the CO2 build naturally for as long as possible, focusing on subtle sensations, buzzing and tingling in the body, and visualizing whatever it is you're visualizing. Again, clouds, waves, trees, flowers. A little thing with visualization, if you visualize dynamic scenes, clouds moving, waves folding or rising and falling, a flower blooming, that dynamism is going to make the scene, the visualization, more enticing to the mind, because the mind wants something changing. Something static is too unreal. And so visualizing moving objects is helpful. And so you're sitting there, and then all of a sudden it gets very intense. The CO2 is built, your brain is sending signals, the nervous system is sending signals. Try to stay as relaxed as you can for as long as you can. But when when it all gets to like the red zone, maximum intensity, and your will is breaking, at that point, contract. Make fists with your hands. Pull your belly into your spine. Clench your jaw. Suck up your throat. It's called Jalandhara Bandha. If you're familiar with it and use it. But if you look at my throat right now, Jalandhara Bandha is... And so I always imagine sort of a puppy being held up by the scruff, and the throat is lifted up into the throat. Or Mula Bandha, contract the pelvic floor. But all of this contraction in those final moments of panic is going to help you build more tapas, right? Build more acidity and collect more prana, more wakefulness. It's only going to help you for maybe a second, maybe 2 seconds. But, there's a lot of spirit, a lot of willpower that's harvested in that second of self-restraint. Then you're going to take this really panicked inhale and then start to breathe normally. Okay? So you're relaxed for as long as you can be, and then in that final moment of panic, contract the body. You're essentially arresting, through that willed contraction, the body's automatic response to breathe in and contract through its own patterns. Last thing I want to mention is when you're breathing normally to recover, breathe as normally as you need until you feel your sort of internal experience return to homeostasis. But notice while you're breathing mindfully that there are natural moments of Kumbhaka. When you breathe in, there is a momentary pause. And when you breathe out, there is a momentary pause. And while you've always breathed this way, now because of your relationship to Kumbhaka, you'll see it there. You'll see that natural pause. You might remember what it represents, a surge in consciousness, a lifting away from the body or drifting back down into the body. And so it's sort of beautiful to see that these techniques, these experiences, and in that the ideas that yogis pulled from them, the ideas yogis didn't impose their beliefs onto things, they observed them with such intensity that they realized their mental nature, that they've always been floating around, and now we have a relationship to them. Cool? Makes sense? So you're going to breathe as long as you need to recover. Exhale, hold the breath for as long as possible. This is, in preparation for Mahasamadhi, the final graduation of the adept, where they cross over that line that you will find is impossible to cross at this point because you're not ready. You're not at death's door right now. Okay, sweet, super cool, super intense, super profound stuff. It will be physically intense. If it is too intense for you, I guess last final statement, if it's too intense for you, you don't have to push all the way, right? You can just hold your breath with nothing in your lungs and move as deeply into it as you want. Or you can exhale but retain some breath in your lungs after you've exhaled, and that'll make it a little bit softer for you. Awesome. We have 20 minutes to work on this today. At the end, we'll work with a little bit of Kumbhaka, inhale, hold, exhale, hold, but in general, you're just going to be focusing on the external retention via Kumbhaka. Cool. Good morning, everyone. Again, good to see you. Let's do this. Strong seated position. Rest your wrists on your knees. Really tall spine. Shut your jaw. Spread your fingers very wide. And let's just stay here for a second. Spread your fingers as wide as you can and consider you can spread them wider. Imagine the webbing between the fingertips might start to tear. To spread the fingers wider, focus on the top of your hand, which is now facing down. And imagine all the carpal bones, right, the bones in your hands, and the muscles between them contracting to separate the fingers and stretch the palm. Now feel your forearm and engage the forearm and the wrist to spread the fingers and stretch the palm. Right, so you're enrolling new muscle groups for a very specific task. Now just feel the skin of the palm buzzing and tingling. Inhale, hold your breath, exhale, hold your breath in a really small way, but notice as you hold your breath, one, you become more sensitive to the sensations you're focusing on, and two, you might be able to spread your fingers wider. And this is because as you hold your breath, your attention automatically shifts into the body, and because of that increased intention, you have more control. When we are conscious over things, we can exert control over things. Hence the yogi's great equation. Prana equals chitta. Our vital energy equals our consciousness. Just take a couple breaths focusing on that tingling in the palm. Now bring a random finger to each thumb and attempt to feel something similar to that tingling and tickling and vibrating inside the body, inside the rib cage, inside the belly. If you can't feel anything, ask yourself, what does nothing feel like? I'm asking you to feel vibration, and you're saying, I feel nothing. So therefore, what does that nothing that you feel, that you're labeling, feel like? Does it feel like space? Does it have weight? Does it have a shape? Or is it weightless? Often what prevents us from feeling more and more subtle sensations is just the idea that we can't feel anything. And so when you're holding your breath with nothing in your lungs, external retention, via Kumbhaka, while you're visualizing, if you focus on this vibratory sensation, it will help the process. It'll make it all sweeter. So breathe normally and deeply. Notice there is a natural Kumbhaka in every breath in and every breath out. When you are ready, exhale through your mouth so all the air is pushed out of the lungs, and hold your breath. Once you're holding your breath, just stay relaxed, focusing on this vibratory sensation and visualizing dynamic scenes, moving clouds, blooming flowers, cresting waves. When you can no longer hold your breath, then tighten intensely and quickly. Pull the belly in. Make fists with your hands. Clench your arms. Clench your teeth as if you were holding on to that emptiness. When you need to breathe in, it should be panicked. Huge inhale. And then breathe normally again. Now, in regards to the overall exercise today, the less time you spend breathing normally in between the retention, the more prana you collect, the more heat you will generate, and the richer your meditation will be afterwards. And so if you enjoy the intensity of all this, spend less time breathing normally in between the retention. Everything is balanced. As extreme as this external retention is, the following breath in is invigorating. It feels like the breath of life and comes with a pronounced exhilaration and sweetness. And so Hatha Yoga, this forceful style, is about balance at the extremes. And taking the time to practice these extremes, reaching into the far ends of dualism, at least as they manifest in the body and the mind, when we come out and live our ordinary lives, that center point, which tightly orbits self, is a lot more obvious. Okay, let's go into a standard Kumbhaka, 1 to 1.5 ratio. Try to feel what is consistent throughout each segment of the technique. What is consistent through the inhale, the top retention, the exhale, and the bottom retention. It's that vibratory nature. It's blood flowing, electricity coursing through nerves, an anonymous tingle. And in light of our conversation, Mahasamadhi, that final graduation for the adept, this vibratory signal will be the last thing to leave, if it leaves at all. One more round of Kumbhaka. Again on this bottom retention, Hold your breath for as long as you can. And think of Mahasamadhi. Appreciate that one day you will cross that uncrossable line. And who knows what happens then. After that, breathe normally. Kaivalya, aloneness. Slow down the breath. Notice that immediate effect. Heightened presence. Listen to the world around you. Invite your environment in. Consider the context. It's not just your room. It's not just your house. It's not just your city. It's the stars. It's galaxies. It's gravity. It's time itself. And from aloneness, there is this intimacy, imagined and real. It's just you and that thing. If you can feel that, as if you were on a mountain summit above the cloud layer, above the village, if you can feel that, that is a unique pattern within your neurology that is firing. A unique set of neurons, thousands strong, that have learned to work in conjunction to forge a retouchable, a reaccessible epiphany. Inhale, arms reach up and overhead, palms touch above you. Again, notice the potential of your posture. Slowly bring your hands to heart center and attempt to strike that epiphany of internal distance, of mental elevation, of aloneness and intimacy. Attempt to strike it 3 times, 4 times in a row. It's just you in the world. thumb knuckles to third eye center. And just focus. No dogma, no philosophy, just focus on that tiny sensation, and what should arise is a consequence. That which is aware within you is more obvious to you. Exhale, release your wrists to your knees. Best posture you can muster. With an inhale, open your eyes. I am no longer meditating.